The week my brother's wedding venue sent me a check for $43,000. My mother called to tell me I wasn't invited to the rehearsal dinner. I remember exactly where I was standing. In my shop, out back, sanding down a custom walnut dining table for a client in Westmount. Sawdust on my forearms. CBC radio on in the background, the smell of fresh-cut wood that I've loved since I was 12 years old, watching my grandfather work in his garage. My phone buzzed on the workbench. I wiped my hands on my jeans before I picked it up. "Sweetheart," my mother said. She only calls me sweetheart when she needs something, or when she's about to say something she knows I won't like. "I need to talk to you about the rehearsal dinner." I turned down the radio. "Okay, your brother and Vanessa feel it would be better if you didn't come, just to the rehearsal dinner. You're still in the wedding, obviously." I didn't say anything for a moment. "It's just Vanessa's family is very professional. Her father is a circuit court judge. Her brothers are both in finance. Her mother chairs the board of a hospital foundation. They're going to be asking everyone what they do, and your brother thinks it would be he just doesn't want any awkward conversations." "Awkward conversations," I repeated. "You know how it is. Vanessa's mother already made a comment at Easter about how interesting it was that you worked with your hands." She said it in a tone. My mother lowered her voice, as if my sister-in-law-to-be's mother might somehow overhear from 3 provinces away. "We just don't want the first impression of our family to be, you know." "A carpenter," I said, silence. "I'm not trying to hurt you," she said. "This is just one dinner. The wedding is still 6 weeks away." I said, "I understand," and I hung up. I stood there for a while with my phone in my hand. The walnut grain caught the afternoon light coming through the shop window. I had orders backed up 14 weeks. I had a waiting list. I had a workshop assistant I'd hired 6 months ago because I couldn't keep up on my own. I had a check sitting on my desk from a client in Westmount who'd paid in full, up front, for a custom dining suite. Table, 8 chairs, matching sideboard, $43,000. I didn't tell my mother any of that. I just went back to sanding. Let me back up, because this story doesn't start with that phone call. It starts about 8 years earlier, in the basement of my parents' house in Hamilton, Ontario, where I used to spend every weekend working on furniture. I had no business building with tools I'd borrowed from my grandfather before he passed. I was 24. I had a kinesiology degree I'd never used, a student loan I was paying down by working reception at a physiotherapy clinic, and absolutely zero plan for my life. What I had was this: a compulsive need to make things with my hands, and a grandfather who had left me his entire workshop when he died the year before. Bandsaw, router table, hand planes, chisels, every clamp you could imagine, and journals full of his own notes on technique going back 30 years. My brother was 27. He was doing his MBA at Schulich. He wore business casual on weekends. He talked about equity and portfolio optimization at Christmas dinner. My parents looked at him the way people look at something they've built that turned out better than expected. Proud. Relieved. They looked at me the way people look at a renovation that's taking longer than planned. "When are you going to figure out what you actually want to do?" my mother asked. Probably 14 times over the course of those years. Not mean about it. Genuinely worried. She was a dental office administrator her whole career, stable and sensible, and she truly could not understand why someone would choose uncertainty when certainty was available. My father was softer about it. He'd say things like, "Your grandfather made beautiful things, but he had a pension from the mill. You need a foundation, sweetheart." He was the only one besides my mother who called me sweetheart. I think I got that word confused with safety for a long time. My brother was less soft. He wasn't cruel, I want to be fair about that, but he had a way of asking questions that carried the weight of conclusions. "So you're still doing the furniture thing?" he'd say at family dinners. Still, as if it were a phase I should have outgrown. "Are you actually making money, or is it more of a hobby situation?" Hobby situation. That one stuck around in my head for years. I started selling pieces on Kijiji at first, a coffee table here, a bookshelf there. Then someone bought an entryway bench I'd built from reclaimed barn board and posted it on their Instagram, and I got 6 messages in 2 days asking if I took commissions. I built a website on a Saturday afternoon using a free template I called the Business Grain & Co. because I liked the way it sounded, and because my grandfather's name was Graham, and I wanted something of him in it without being sentimental about it. For the first 2 years, I worked the clinic during the week and the shop on evenings and weekends. I was exhausted all the time. I ate a lot of peanut butter toast. I drove a 2009 Civic with a crack in the dashboard that I'd been meaning to fix since 2016. My brother bought a condo in Liberty Village and started doing half marathons and dating Vanessa, whose father was, as I would come to understand, a circuit court judge. I met Vanessa at Thanksgiving 3 years in. She was elegant in the way that some people are, not trying, just built that way. She asked me what I did and I told her, and she said, "Oh, like Etsy stuff," and then turned to my brother and asked him something about their upcoming trip to Portugal. I liked her fine. That's the honest truth. She wasn't malicious. She just didn't know what to do with me, and so she categorized me as quickly as possible. I moved on. The business kept growing. I moved out of my parents' basement and into a proper shop, an industrial unit in the East End of Hamilton that smelled like rust and old motor oil when I first signed the lease, and that I spent 3 weekends cleaning before I could move in. I hired my first assistant, a 19-year-old named Jamie who dropped out of college and could listen to a description of a joint and understand immediately what I meant. He's still with me. He runs the floor now. I started getting referrals. Interior designers, mostly. A woman named Helena, who did high-end residential in Toronto, sent me a client, and that client sent me 2 more, and those 2 sent me 3 more, and suddenly I was turning down work. I raised my prices. The work kept coming. I started doing commercial contracts, restaurant furniture, boutique hotel pieces, a law firm that wanted a custard-room table in white oak with brass inlay. That one went in a building on Bay Street that I drove past the following December and pointed at from my truck like a complete dork, saying out loud to nobody, "I made that." I didn't tell my family much of this, not because I was hiding it, I just didn't think they were interested. When I brought it up at family dinners, my mother would say, "That's wonderful, sweetheart," and then ask my brother about his Q3 numbers. My father would nod and then forget to ask again. It wasn't cruelty, it was just the habit of 7 years of not quite believing in me. So I stopped offering and waited to be asked. Nobody asked. Then my brother got engaged, and Vanessa's family came into focus as a kind of organizing principle of our entire family's behavior, and I got that phone call in the shop. I understand, I hung up. I went back to sanding. What I didn't know, standing in my workshop with my phone in my hand and sawdust on my jeans, was that I had already been hired to build the furniture for my brother's wedding reception. I know how that sounds. Let me explain. 6 months before the rehearsal dinner phone call, I'd received an inquiry through my website. A wedding planner named Celine, based in Montreal, working an event at a vineyard property in Niagara-on-the-Lake, needed custom farm tables and crossback chairs for a reception of 80 guests, plus a sweetheart table in figured maple with a live edge. She had seen my work through a designer connection in Toronto. Budget wasn't a concern. She needed quality, and she needed someone who could deliver on a firm timeline. I quoted her. She accepted without negotiating. We signed a contract. I started on the tables in February. I didn't know whose wedding it was for. I knew it was at a vineyard in Niagara-on-the-Lake on the 3rd Saturday in July. I knew the bride had very specific taste. Celine sent over a 12-page vision document with reference images and wood tone swatches. I knew the guest count and the table dimensions and the finish specifications down to the sheen level of the topcoat. I did not know the bride's last name. The contract was with Celine's events company. The tables were the best work I'd ever done. I said that to Jamie one afternoon in April, standing back and looking at a row of them, waiting for their final finish. He agreed. We were both quiet about it for a moment. There's a kind of satisfaction in that kind of work that I genuinely cannot describe. It's physical. and it's intellectual, and it's something else that doesn't have a good word for it. My grandfather used to say that good furniture should feel like it was always supposed to exist, like you didn't build it so much as find it. Those tables felt like that. In May, I got the call from my mother about the rehearsal dinner. I understood and hung up and went back to sanding. In June, I delivered the tables to the vineyard property in Niagara-on-the-Lake and spent a day with Jamie setting up the reception space. Celine was on site, and she was the kind of professional who makes you feel immediately at ease, efficient, warm, completely in command. She walked the space when we were done and ran her hand along the surface of the head table and said, "These are extraordinary." I drove back to Hamilton that evening, with the windows down. 3 weeks later, I got dressed in the green bridesmaid dress my brother had asked me to wear and drove to a vineyard property in Niagara-on-the-Lake for my brother's wedding. I figured it out approximately 4 seconds after I turned into the driveway. I sat in my car for a while. Not because I was upset, exactly. More because I was doing math. 6 months of work, 16 tables, 80 chairs, the Sweetheart Table Inn figured maple that had taken me 11 days to get right. The deposit and the final payment and the delivery invoice, all going to Celine's company, which I now understood had been hired by Vanessa's parents to plan the wedding. My furniture was going to be in every photograph. My furniture was going to hold the weight of my family's plates at the reception dinner. My furniture was going to be the surface Vanessa and my brother sat behind when they made their toasts. And my mother had called me 2 months earlier to say Vanessa's family might find my carpentry embarrassing. I got out of the car. The ceremony was outdoors, under a pergola, strung with lights, with the vineyard rose in the background catching the late afternoon sun. It was genuinely beautiful. My brother cried when he saw Vanessa coming down the aisle, which surprised me and made me feel something warm and uncomplicated toward him for the first time in years. He loves her. That's real, whatever else is true. I cried a little too. I was standing at the end of the row with the other bridesmaids, and I watched my parents watch my brother get married. And I felt the particular grief of loving people who can't quite see you and not knowing what to do with that grief except keep working. The reception moved inside to the barn space. I walked in and stopped just inside the door. It looked even better than I remembered from delivery day. The way Celine's team had styled it, the candlelight, the greenery, the linens, it had become something more than furniture. But the bones of it, the structure and the proportion and the warmth of the wood, that was mine. I knew every joint. I had sanded every surface by hand. I found my seat at one of the guest tables. The crossback chair held my weight the way I knew it would. Solid, no wobble. The back angle just right for a long evening. I ran my thumb along the underside of the apron. I'd put a small stamp there, like I do on all my commercial pieces. A small G with a wood grain mark beside it. My mark. Vanessa's mother was seated 2 tables away. She was in her 60s, well put together, the kind of woman who seems to be evaluating the cost of everything in a room without appearing to do so. Her name was Margaret. I'd heard about her the whole drive down from Hamilton in my mother's running commentary. Margaret this, Margaret that. Margaret chairs the hospital foundation board. Margaret's husband, the judge. She caught my eye across the tables and gave me the polite smile of someone placing me in a category. I smiled back. Dinner was served. The speeches happened. My father gave one that made people laugh and then made them cry, which is the best kind. My brother thanked everyone with genuine feeling. Vanessa's father gave a long speech about integrity and family legacy that was directed mostly at the ceiling. Then Celine stood up. She wasn't part of the official program, but the family had asked her to say a few words about how the event came together, which is something wedding planners do, sometimes at high-end events. She talked about the vision and the months of planning, and the incredible vendors who had made it possible. And then she said, "The furniture you're sitting on and dining at tonight was custom built by a local artisan. Every table, every chair, every piece. I've worked with vendors across the country for 15 years, and this is some of the finest work I have ever seen. The craftsperson behind it is Grain & Co., based in Hamilton. and I'm told she's actually here tonight as a guest. She paused. If you get a chance to run your hand along the edge of that sweetheart table, please do. You'll understand what I mean. There was a little ripple of impressed murmuring. People looked at the tables. People ran their hands along the wood. My mother turned to my father. Margaret set down her wineglass. My brother looked across the room at me. Then he looked at the table he was sitting at. Then back at me. I didn't wave. I didn't smile pointedly. I just sat there with my glass of Riesling and watched my family understand something they had been refusing to understand for about 8 years. My mother found me by the bar during the dancing. She had a look on her face I hadn't seen before, not guilt exactly, something quieter than guilt. Recalibration, maybe. That was you, she said. The furniture. Yes. She looked out at the room, at the tables full of people, the candles guttering a little now. As the evening went on, the figure's maple sweetheart table where my brother and Vanessa were dancing just in front of it. I didn't know, she said. I know you didn't. She was quiet for a moment. You should have told me. I thought about how to answer that carefully. I've been trying to tell you for a few years, I said. But I don't think you were quite ready to hear it. She didn't argue. That told me more than anything she could have said. Margaret appeared, which I had been expecting. She was holding a glass of sparkling water and she had that focused look of someone who has just done a Google search and wants to discuss the results. You're the ones Celine was talking about, she said. Grain & Co. Yes. I've seen your work before, she said. In a law office on Bay Street. I was there for a board meeting in March. I noticed the boardroom table. I actually asked who made it.
They know.
They had a card. I kept it. She looked at me steadily. I didn't put it together until just now. It's a small world, I said. She looked around the room, at the tables I'd built, at the chairs, at the sweetheart table that her daughter was now standing beside for photographs. How long did all of this take you? Start to finish, about 14 weeks. I had help for the chairs. The tables I did mostly myself. She nodded slowly as if she was adding figures. I owe you an apology, she said. At Easter, I made a comment, a thoughtless one. You said it was interesting that I worked with my hands. She had the grace to look uncomfortable. I was condescending. I didn't have the information I needed, but I also wasn't interested in getting it, and that's worse. She extended her hand. I'd like to reach out about some work. We're renovating our place in the Eastern Townships, if you're interested. I shook her hand. Send me an email, I said. I have a waiting list, but I'll see what I can do. My brother found me later, near the end of the evening, when most of the guests were out on the patio and the barn had gone quiet. He was still in his suit, but his tie was off, and he had that loose, happy look of someone who had just had the best day of his life. He sat down across from me at one of my tables. He put his hands on the surface and looked at it for a moment. This is incredible work, he said. Thank you. I didn't know. I know, he looked at me. I'm sorry about the rehearsal dinner. I handled that badly. It was a real apology. No qualifications, no explanation, no I'm sorry you felt, just the thing itself. You did, I said. I think I've been handling a lot of things badly for a long time, he said. With you. I looked at him across the table. My brother, who used to steal my Halloween candy and teach me card tricks and drive me to school in his first car with the heat broken. Both of us in our winter coats inside the car, laughing at how ridiculous it was. My brother, who somewhere along the way started measuring things in terms of how they looked and forgot to keep measuring them in terms of what they were. Yeah, I said. But you're trying to get it right now. That counts. He put his hand on mine for a second. Then he stood up and said, dance with me, and I said, you're a terrible dancer. And he said, I know, come on, and I went. Grain & Co. is 4 people now. Jamie runs the floor. I have 2 more full-time craftspeople, both of them young, both of them genuinely talented. We moved into a bigger space in Stony Creek at the beginning of last year. I have a proper office for the first time instead of a corner of the workshop with a folding table. I did take the project in the Eastern Townships. Margaret's renovation. It was a good project, interesting, brief, beautiful space, and she turned out to be a demanding client in the way that makes you better, not the way that makes you miserable. She sent 3 referrals afterward, including a hotel in Quebec City that is now one of our best commercial accounts. I don't have a triumphant conclusion about my family, because real families don't work that way. My mother still sometimes forgets to ask about the business, and then remembers and asks 3 questions quickly in a row to make up for it. My brother texts me more than he used to, sometimes just to say he walked by a piece in a restaurant and thought it looked like my work. He's usually right. My father came to the shop in the fall. He wanted to see the space. He stood in the middle of it and turned around slowly, looking at everything, and then he picked up a hand plane that had been my grandfather's and held it for a long moment without saying anything. When he put it down, he said, "Your grandfather would be proud of you," and I had to find something to look at on the other side of the room for a minute. I think about the rehearsal dinner sometimes. Not with anger, more with a kind of curiosity about the version of myself who said, "I understand," and hung up. She was right to say it. Not because the situation was okay, because it wasn't, but because she already knew something that took her family a lot longer to figure out. You don't need people to believe in you before you do the work. You do the work, you put your mark on it, and eventually the work speaks in rooms you didn't expect, at tables you built with your own hands, in front of people who thought they already knew what you were. The mark is still there on the underside of that sweetheart table. Small G, wood grain beside it. I know because I checked the morning after the wedding, before the vineyard staff came in, to break down the setup. It's mine. It was always mine. I just let it be long enough to prove it.